Welcome to 25 Minutes with Cap, our first discussion of the year. My name is Adam Sills, and with me here is Otakar Hubschmann, the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer at TransRe. Is that that's your
That
sign on?
is the official imprimatur. So we'll go with that.
Awesome. Well, hey, before we get into the discussion, this is the property of CapSpecialty. Anyone who wants permission to use any parts of the podcast can send an email to marketing@capspecialty.com. Uh, so to get right into it, we got together about a year ago.
Yeah.
What's new?
Well, it's interesting to be able now doing this a second time with you to sort of mark where things are and the advances that have happened and sort of keep track of the rate of change. And like since we talked last year, there's so many more large language models as to have become almost like commoditized now.
Mm,
And I think when we talked, it was maybe GPT 3.5, and the one from Google Gemini had just come out, their first one. And there's been really big advances in like a super short amount of time. I don't know if I talked about it when I was on the last time, but like the rate of change is incredible. And um,
where are you seeing the change happen?
well, so like
It's
generally
just
speaking,
faster.
it's just faster, more places and more eyeballs are on it, so more things are happening. But like if you think about generally speaking for like large language models, there's a couple different ways to achieve improvements in them or like areas of focus. And one is in a pre-training phase, which is like you feed it the entire internet. And people think that potentially we're reaching the limits of that scaling because like there's
Mm,
only so much internet, and once you've done that you have to come up with synthetic data, and there's some evidence to suggest that if you feed it too much synthetic data there's sort of like a collapse in the efficacy.
sure.
And then there's a post training thing, which is like you can change the weightings and you can have humans give it feedback as to how good it's doing. And then the third way, which OpenAI has been doing with their O1 and O3 models, is this idea of reasoning, which is to say that the model basically takes longer to think about the answer, and it does like sort of a chain of thought thinking through. And the most recent model, which I think OpenAI released at the end of the year, O3, has scored extremely highly in sort of benchmarks, besting all the other models by like a pretty good margin. So that's in just a year from when I
And
talked
is
to you.
and is that addressing some of the concerns around hallucinations from the models, or is it something different?
That's a great question. So I think if for a lot of these companies, the ultimate goal is this idea of this like um, AGI or artificial general intelligence, where it's like as good as a human, smarter than a human, super
Sure.
intelligence. If that's like the North Star for a lot of these places, they're just trying to increase how good the answers are for these large language models. And, to your point, the hallucinations have gotten better, but,
Mm,
one of the things about the large language models is that they, they pick or sample from a distribution of possible answers. And so that leads to some variability in the answers. Sometimes that can lead to some of the hallucinations type stuff. But it's interesting because that's a little bit of a gift and a curse of the function or how the large language models function, because it's a little more difficult to make them like wholly deterministic, where you lower the variability. There's something called temperature, which basically says, how much variability do you want in the answer?
mhm.
But at the same time, if you increase this variability, you get really interesting answers. But that, in terms of practical application, is an interesting problem to solve for when, like, in what cases do you want the exact same answer over and over again? Are there any cases where you want variability? Some of the things,
Mm,
some places where you'd want variability is like if you're like, help me write this thing better,
sure.
and it can give you
Sure.
some interesting ideas. Or one of the things that, just as a random anecdote that I use it for is like, give me some ideas for this. And you can say, give me 100 ideas. And so it's very interesting, like, almost costless way of sort of doing a brain scratch for all the possibilities for one particular thing or the other.
One of the things that we talked about a little bit uh, last year was, how does it apply to underwriting? And we'll talk about it later, your newsletter. But have you seen a change in the underwriting? So we had, so, you've got the AI underwriter, you read numerous articles about artificial intelligence and underwriting. Have you seen artificial intelligence or machine learning uh, change underwriting in the business yet? Now, it is worth noting uh, that you're on the reinsurance side, so maybe it's a little bit different.
Right.
But go ahead.
I mean, so you and I spoke earlier at lunch, and I have been probably for the first time seeing actual companies come in and say, now we're doing it with machine learning. And, one of the interesting things to me is that like the predictive aspect that people sort of think they're going to get from these large language models, we really had before with like the what was called like discriminative machine learning, which was like, guessing, predicting a number or predicting an event. And for probably the first time and as long as I've been in the industry, which is almost 8.5, 9 years, I'm seeing companies that are doing um, large part of their processes and sort of risk selection through
Mm,
machine learning. And it's sort of right now like a trickle, but those companies I think are notable in that they're beating the market pretty handedly.
mm.
And whether or not
How do
that,
you know?
well, I mean, they have sort of auditable results,
Sure. Okay.
but um, whether or not that stays, that margin stays, probably not because, as people will chase that alpha versus the market and that'll
Sure.
decay.
Sure.
Um, but to answer your question, it's beginning to happen, and I think it's the start of some companies that have been sort of they've decided to go solely or like hybrid with machine learning and humans. We're seeing that um, methodology and that approach has been successful.
All different types of products, or are you seeing it on certain products more than others?
Yeah, so and that's an interesting question because there's some aspects of this is like will I'm seeing it in certain types of products, and so just like a trading strategy, is that alpha or margin versus the market that they're evincing right now, is that going to be something that they can sustain and is it scalable?
Mm,
So sometimes you have a great trading strategy, has great returns, but you want to get it to trading $100 million, you can only keep it at $20 million, with great returns. I mean, I'm talking from like, when I was trading. Um, but I suspect that's probably how it's going to be. And because, like I said, there's a lot of chasing of um, margins by everybody else once they see success in a particular area.
and I don't know how easy this is to articulate, but how special are the models that you're seeing? I mean, is it,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And so this has been something that's been really interesting to me because I think that you would suspect maybe there was some crazy secret sauce,
Right.
and
And what you're thinking about is if someone might be showing up in 9 months to just kind of do the same thing.
yeah, and so there's been, my guess is there's a first mover advantage because I've seen
Sure.
some of these models articulated and they're sort of like the way that you would expect to go about it. And one of the things or some of the things that's really important is like getting really good clean data is can be like the make or break thing for the model.
Hmm.
But for the most part, what I've seen is there hasn't been any crazy um, secret sauce. And
Right.
in fact, I think it's like I said, it's just a function of them applying this thing, which um, once other people see that it's been successful, there'll be like some uptake. And so another way to put it is like if I were to recreate those strategies from scratch, the ones that are successful with it would be the same way. I would recreate it in the same way that they've been successful with it, you
Sure.
know? But in some ways, like I said, either getting like a really good data set from somewhere or assembling it yourself or cleaning a data set can be the thing that propels just, the regular, quote unquote, regular algorithms past some crazy special secret sauce.
Sure, sure. The we've seen it in some products, not all products. Are there certain external factors that need to change for momentum to increase?
So, empirically, the thing that I found that's been the most important is like your boss telling you have to do it, because that's the ultimate forcing function. And I've been very lucky at TransRe where I work now that um, I was brought in by Mike Sapner, who's no longer the CEO, but by Mike Sapner and Ken Brand, who's the CEO now. And they were always terrific about embracing this type of change and adopting this type of change. And now my boss, I report to the COO, CFO, Matt Mahoney, and he's the same way. And so I think um, what was interesting, what I noticed is that, we had my team that I've overseen for, like I said, almost 9 years now, was doing machine learning for almost 9 years now. And so
Mm-hmm.
when GPT came into the zeitgeist sort of like 2 years ago, there was and it's still going on, there was a large degree of like FOMO. Like we need
Of course.
an AI thing and we need to report back to the C suite that we have an AI thing. And so I think for TransRe, they were very familiar because we had already been doing the work. And so
Mhm.
they didn't have that reactive action. And so I think what's going to happen in some places, it's like there's an initial overreach, there's an initial sort of like CapEx, expenditure where you pay for a team or you pay for a third party. And then there's a gap between expectations and results. And, you know, like I said, the forcing function is going to be your boss, and the forcing function is going to be if another place has it and is showing really good results.
Is it as easy as just kind of hiring a team?
So it's not as easy as that, and it's tricky. And I'm like speaking my book a little bit,
Go ahead.
but I think you need someone or a team that can take or articulate or transform the ideas into something that can be solved by machine learning.
Right.
And like knowing that Gen AI and LLMs right now are sort of like the big, bright, shiny object. And like if you're carrying around the Gen AI hammer, everything looks like a nail,
Mm.
So
Where is it not going to work? Or where, what are the things that aren't nails?
where I think it's not going to work, or I guess the application where I don't think it's going to work is just broadly throwing the Gen AI at stuff,
Yeah,
broadly throwing
sure.
the LLMs at stuff.
Sure.
And again, where I've seen success at companies or like with peers or even with us is like you start with some tractable problem, a good data set,
Sure.
and you try to show that the LLM plus, like I said, this old school machine learning, this regression and classification machine learning can deliver on this promise and sort of like it's a good strategy, even though it's very difficult in this FOMO environment to like, under promise and over deliver if you can do that, because it's very easy to get caught up in the let's solve it with AI, which is like a very nebulous way to
Of
think
course.
about stuff.
Of course. I mean, so AI is the buzz term.
Yeah.
Uh, what else? I mean, what else are people, or what else do you see that potentially could start to transform insurance outside of AI?
I
I
mean,
understand that you're the AI officer.
yeah, I'm contractually obligated. I can't talk anything outside AI. It's interesting because like I'm trying to think who said. I think Churchill said like never let a good crisis go to waste, and I think Rahm Emanuel said it later. But
Yeah.
in this case, never let a good technological massive wave of change go to waste. And so I feel like a lot of the things that are coming part and parcel with AI, like the robotic side
Mm.
or the video side, are going to bring huge changes. So I mean, I think again, it sounds like I'm talking my own book, but like AI is so big and so transformative. And what's interesting is like maybe not necessarily exactly now, but if you understand it and are like steeped in it, you can see sort of the grassroots springs of what's coming down the pike. And
Mm.
it will be uh transformative. And it sounds like a hyperbole, but like I said, but um I've never seen the rate of change or like sort of the reach of what they're trying to all these big tech companies are trying to accomplish before in my life.
Right. Right. And it's because of the technology, not because of their focus on the technology.
It's because of in this race to chase to get this um super intelligence, this AGI. It's like people will find ways to do it. It's like the Jeff Goldblum Jurassic Park,
Sure.
nature finds a
Finds
way.
a way. Yeah.
And so when we've exhausted sort of like scaling up the models, we'll figure out how to make better chips,
Mm.
right? And then we'll figure out how to do better fab factories to make the chips. And sort of like one thing begets the next thing, which leads to this confluence of factors, which is like sort of what we're going through now. And we're still in like the relative early innings, and it's been like, sort of 2 years, which is crazy.
Mm. Do you have, so we've talked a lot about underwriting and risk taking. Are there other more operational parts of insurance that you think are apt for disruption?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've taken the approach where we've initially tried to address some of like the very rote, sort of unsexy things with like the data
Mm.
intake, data summarization, data extraction. And, the way I think somebody from JP Morgan who works in their AI department, I heard him in an interview saying, you know, right now machines are much, much, much obviously faster than humans, but
Sure.
humans in some respects are still more accurate. So it's like in an hour, would you rather have, you know, 10 documents done at like, 94, 96% accuracy, or 1,000 done at 80,
Sure.
and then spend the time to like clean up the 20%, like to get back to the 100. And so we've really been focusing on that aspect of it and sort of getting our data sets in a better place again to continue to add like the discriminative AI on top of it to make predictions from it. And so, and the older school, like I said, like the regression classification things are really like the predictors. The LLMs make predictions, but it's within the context of like, next word, next pixel stuff. And so we've been focusing again across all silos on like the data intake, data standardization with using the LLMs, and then like summary comparison. And like those things, I think being able to do like a summary comparison, um, those will become sort of table stakes, I believe, like relatively soon, because that's what the LLMs right now are really good at. Like I said, there's still definitely variability in like the output. There's still
Right.
stuff like that, but um, it's getting better all the time. And like I said, you can see there's so many eyeballs addressing all these little things that people sort of gripe about now. And there's something called I think it's called the usability versus complexity, or the user's paradox, where it's like, I personally know how um, I have a great team of programmers and they build some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And like I have an idea of how difficult it is to build them and what goes into adopting and harnessing the LLM products to like make something useful. And it's crazy because like all this work goes on behind the scenes. And then like if you give it to the user and there's some variability in the answer, they're sort of like, well, I don't like it. Like,
Well,
so there's an
yeah,
interesting, it's like this paradox of how do you strike the balance between building the products with the understanding of how complex it is, but like getting them to work. Like at the end of the day, it's like nobody cares how cool the shiny toy is unless it like makes you money,
yeah,
or saves you
helps
money
get
or
your
saves you
job better.
time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are there, one of the things we talked about last year was around, you know, challenges around, you know, whether there are regulations in place or regulations that are yet to be in place.
Yeah.
Have you seen thinking evolve there, more comfort or more questions?
So I think what we've seen so far, the initial volley in terms of the regulatory environment has been from the EU, and they sort of were
Sure.
a little draconian in their regulations. And what we saw there was the tech companies were saying, well, okay, like it's in your purview to like have very stringent rules, but then you can't use our models.
Sure.
So there was sort of a brain drain of smart people and engineers leaving those countries. So um, I expect that the US will be more careful, I guess, about, making it not so harsh as to have it be a place where people want to work and a
Sure.
place where people can still innovate. But the regulatory part is like gigantic right now. And at TransRe we have um, a regulatory AI committee that our CTO Sock Pichardo put together, and we're like constantly thinking about what's coming down the pike in terms of regulation, privacy, safety, all that types of stuff.
Mm.
So that is really like part and parcel with building these models, and that's sort of like a full-time job to make sure that like you don't want to build an awesome thing and then you can't use it because it oversteps some regulatory bounds or what, or you have to. It's weird because it's a little chicken or the egg. Like you have to almost build it without knowing necessarily what's coming from the regulatory side.
You talked about how you could build stuff that's cool, but if people don't quote unquote like it or it doesn't help them,
Yeah.
it's not it. Are there other challenges that you found over the last year? Or what have you been surprised by in terms of challenges?
The I think probably the number one thing is this idea of, and it's I've actually written about it and spoken about this before. Like nobody cares what you built, meaning meaning it doesn't matter whether like nobody cares whether you built the cool new chatbot. Nobody cares whether you built the cool predictive model. There's a building phase,
Right.
and then there's like a selling phase, and understandably nobody should really care, like unless it's really helping them. So it's you know again, you and I were talking about a little bit at lunch. It's like it's almost like a non-starter hard sell to be like, hey, there's a chatbot, you can ask it questions and it knows the entirety of the internet, and that's amazing, but like what have you done for me lately? So it's like you need a thing that does a solves for a specific problem or pain point in your job,
Right.
and that's been um, something while we build these models that we have to keep in mind, and just be very focused. In some ways, building the model is the more linear part, although with these foundational large language models, it's a more interesting sort of discovery process in terms of building. It's not a straightforward software product development cycle. There's more like a experimenting and seeing what happens and what the efficacy is. um, so that's a little more straightforward even than
Mm.
like having to sell the thing, because there's a big spectrum of how interested people are in the first place, whether they're at the beginning or the end of their careers, whether they're going to try to ride out the AI before it hits them, or whether they're
You think
like,
there's a lot of that?
yeah. And I think it's for good reason, because like if I was if I was in that situation, I had done great in my career, like you're not telling me now how to change things,
Right.
so like I was again like that's how you gonna argue with that? And it's like that's nobody likes change. Nobody likes certainly likes change telling them how to do their job. So like it's a very nuanced delivery.
Sure, sure. So hey, you have a newsletter, the AI Underwriter, and it, talk a little bit about it.
So I started the AI Underwriter newsletter on Substack probably a little over a year ago, and
After this,
yeah, it
you
was
felt like you just needed to,
I wanted a place to basically write freely without
yeah,
constraint on stuff that interested me, stuff that I was seeing either, going through with my team or at other places. And, I sort of wanted to build the muscle to be able to like express what I was interested in. And it's been great. And it's been like all upside,
yeah, it's cool.
just getting to meet different people and like expressing your thoughts through writing has been a way that like I really can learn the material better.
Cool. Cool. Well, hey, thanks a lot for taking the time
Yeah, great to see you.
to
The
talk about it.
sequel, great to see you
Yes.
again.
And thanks for joining.
Thank you.